Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. The best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the NFL Wire site, the NFL Wire site from USA Today that covers the Arizona Cardinals. I don't know what I'm saying. On the line with me is my co-host, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the SB Nation Arizona Cardinals site, and we are at episode 615. My goodness, it is so much. Only we don't have a win to talk about, Seth, because, hey, the Cardinals didn't play. They coming off their bye week, and yes, I did say we'd probably have a show last week. I'll be honest, I didn't feel like doing another show. I felt a little under the weather. I'm like, you guys can wait till this week. We're waiting till this week. So sorry about that, Seth. It gave you an extra night off or whatever. So we're back, 6:15. The Cardinals didn't play. The Cardinals are one game ahead of the entire division, Seth. What a weird year this has been in the NFC West, right?
It really is, Jess, and we're coming up to now where the weirdness or how this season plays out is really going to be interesting because one, the team that was supposed to be the best, the San Francisco 49ers, are technically in last place.
They are 1-3 in the division. My goodness, that's critical. That's going to be, and we're going to talk about. One of the things we're going to talk about in this show is we're going to predict how the rest of the season's going to go, since we've got all that fun stuff. But yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, and then you look at the rest of the division, and the Cardinals, like you said, they lead the division. They lead everybody by one game, and with the Rams and Niners, they technically have the tiebreaker, so it's like 1.5 games. And obviously they have a monumental game basically to maintain first place coming up this week with the Seattle Seahawks, because then Seattle gets the head-to-head. So, then we can get into the ifs and ands about everything else, and if the Rams and Niners win, where does everybody end up? But the easiest thing to look at and understand is if the Arizona Cardinals win on Sunday, they maintain first place. They don't have to rely on anybody else doing anything else. They don't have to worry about what anybody else does. And if we would have said that at the beginning of the year, I think you and I would have laughed a little bit. Like, I don't, it's a year ahead, right? It's a year ahead of schedule. And then if you would have told us that after week 6, we would have had you checked for a brain tumor or something serious, because we'd be like, have you watched this team play? They're 2-6, and they have a poop sandwich with a good game in the middle. And to be fair, that good game in the middle is becoming less and less impressive of a win as we get further and further away from it. Not to take anything away from the Cardinals, obviously, but it's just the reality of it, right?
Yeah, it's fun to see. Like I'll say this: if you could have told me they would be 6-4 after 10 games, I could have said, I see a scenario. I think we both had them 5-5. I think when we go back, but you could have convinced us of 6-4. Like, yeah, okay, that's possible, not likely. But to be 6-4 and in first place in this division,
yeah, we would have been like, so Brock Purdy is dead, or
Brock Purdy and Matthew Stafford are both out for the season.
Right, Nick Bosa got hurt. Like, what's happened? And so, it's been an odd season, and so it's fun and it's not, and it's fun in the sense that it's always fun to see this team win. Like, it's just not something that we're used to, and we've talked about that before. However, it's not, and it's not that it's not fun, but it's not fun in the sense that all of this fun, goodwill, impressive season, let's be honest, it like there's a chance that next week they're in second place and you're like dang it. And so that was the thing, is like you know the Seahawks haven't looked good, and then all of a sudden they kind of found their footing at the end of a game against the San Francisco 49ers, who were supposed to, and going into last week, we're still the division favorites. I mean, you and I talked about it. You know, I think they were minus 105 or minus 110, real small, betting favorites. The Cardinals were plus 140. We come out of this week, the Cardinals are plus 100, even money to win the division. The next closest now are the Seahawks, and that's, not something we expected. And you look at what Geno Smith did in that game against the 49ers, and again, you just look at things on paper. Geno throws for 221 and an interception, and Kenneth Walker has 54 yards rushing, and you go, oh man, how much did they lose by? But it's just been an odd year, and
yep.
I think it signifies how odd, with the fact that as much as we love it, the Cardinals are in first place in the division in week 12 of the 2024 NFL season. Nobody, I don't care how much of a homer you are, nobody saw that coming.
Nope. And let's talk about the one thing now that's starting to come up. Kyler Murray, the way he's playing, he's starting to get some recognition around the league. National analysts are talking about him. He's having a fantastic year. Let's talk about his actual likelihood of becoming this year's MVP. We thought that he was a good bet in the offseason when he was 50-1. We thought that was, in terms of a value bet, not in terms of prediction, but as a value bet, as someone who has the ceiling of an MVP and fantastic value, 50-1. That was a fantastic bet. Right now on BetMGM, that's down to 22-1 plus 2,200. And people are talking about him as a dark horse MVP candidate. So let's discuss how likely it is that he could do it. Guys ahead of him, Jalen Hurts at 14-1, Patrick Mahomes 14-1, Jared Goff 6-1, Lamar Jackson 2-1, and Josh Allen 3-2 or plus 150, the favorite. Seth, what do you think? What would it take for Kyler Murray, based on what we've seen so far this year? What would it take between now and the final 7 games of the season for him to be a legitimate MVP contender?
You look at the guys in front of him, as you stated, and look at where they're at statistically. And the first thing that you look at is he would have to double his touchdowns. He'd have to get to 24, probably 25 touchdowns. So in 7 games, that's about, 2 touchdown passes a game. He would have to continue on the pace he is on from a rushing standpoint. He's had a very good season running the football this year. So he's at, where's his rushing numbers at now? There they are. He's at, 371 and 4. He'd probably have to, again, double the touchdown production and probably another, 250 to 300 yards. He'd need to be right around 600-700 yards rushing, because that would put him on pace for if he finished with around 25 passing, 10 rushing, and 3,500 yards passing, and then another 700 yards, you're 42 and 35 total. That would get him probably top 3, because with all of that, we would assume, and I know that's a dangerous thing to do, but we would assume that the Cardinals go 5-2 ish in that and finish
At
with
least. Howard Balzer, he did a piece like the average MVP winner is between 12 and 13 wins. So it honestly, I think, especially for where he is statistically, what he'd have to do, they'd have to go 6-1 in their final 7 games. And he would have to be a major protagonist in that meaning that it's not so much the James Conner show, that it becomes Kyler has the performances that he had against the Dolphins, against the Jets, those type of games consistently down the stretch, and the Cardinals win 6 out of the last 7 games. Otherwise, I don't like, while he is playing at that level, he's not really playing at that level, if you know what I mean. He's not carrying the team, which is kind of what you need is typically the case for your MVP. They're carrying the team. Josh Allen, 100%. I think Jared Goff is going to get serious looks this year, even if we can ignore that. I like to use Jared Goff. So you've got anywhere from Jared Goof to Jared Goat, and you have seen a lot of Jared Goat this year. And then the Texans game was Jared Goof. He, with statistically and with what the Lions are doing, it's going to be hard to ignore him. But even still, because he still is kind of just the caretaker. Who's it? Nick Carter, I believe. Like the guy, he refers to Goff as a civilian, while you have like superheroes like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. That Kyler's in that category too, is just they're otherworldly in their play. And you don't get that from Goff, right? You just get someone who when you protect him, he has the traits to be great. I guess to a lesser extent, like the Brock Purdy effect, only he had that terrible 5 interception game.
Well, and you look at it, to your point, Jess, and whether we can start with QBR, right? So QBR, Kyler's third, number one's Joe Burrow. He's not going to win the MVP. Like, it's just
they haven't won enough games. They haven't won enough games for that.
Lamar Jackson is the favorite, I believe you said, and his is an interesting one because I don't think he wins the MVP if they don't win the division. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's kind of my takeaway from that, is that his MVP candidacy hinges on not finishing the division.
Yeah, well, and it's rare to get an MVP off of a wild. It happens. You get an MVP off a wild card team, but they've got to be wow. And I don't know, like, it'll Lamar Jackson, like, statistically could deserve it, but when you have a Ravens team, don't you feel like that that the voters might get a little fatigued with Lamar Jackson, especially especially like they reward him for it, and then you get the playoff performance. It shouldn't affect them, but I feel like it will.
Well, and I feel like he would be better off if they were, if they were competing for the 1 seed, but right now they're competing for the playoffs. I mean, they're not even a guarantee for the playoffs. So it makes it a lot tougher, right? So, so Lamar, Josh Allen is, I think, on his way to win his first one. And it's interesting because his numbers are not infinitely better than Kyler's. He's got 18 passing touchdowns, but 5 interceptions. Kyler's at 12 and 3. And then obviously the rushing total is similar and things of that. But you also look at it, he's got 2 game-winning drives this year. Kyler's got 3 fourth quarter comebacks with 3 game-winning drives. So the clutch situation is interesting. They're very statistically similar in a number of ways. Kyler has a higher QBR and a slightly higher quarterback rating. So like it's not impossible, but I think it's going to go to Josh this year at this juncture.
At this rate, I'd say it'd be between Allen and Goff, but definitely Allen. I think Goff would come in second.
Yeah, and you look
Mahomes,
at it like
Mahomes. No, he's no, not at Mahomes this year. Stop that.
But what's interesting is like you've got, Jalen Hurts. You mentioned Jalen Hurts, statistically no better than Kyler. So like why would he get it over Kyler when he's working with what most would consider a lot more, right? Like the dark horse for me, and I know this is going to be wild to say, Jess, but the dark horse for me, even with the record right now, is Baker Mayfield. And the only reason I say that is his statistics are really, really good. I think he's third in the NFL in passing touchdowns. And they're 4-6. So again, the record's going to be the hard part. He's going to have to go 6-1 down the stretch, get to 10 wins. But he's doing it with so little around him after Chris Godwin, obviously the gruesome injury, Mike Evans being out. And so that'll be the one to watch, because if they end up winning the NFC South, and I don't think it's going to happen. They have a really tough road to hoe to get there, but that's the one to watch just from like a statistical standpoint, because he's playing and they have a chance at the division. And so it's one of those situations where you kind of keep an eye on it, because it feels like it's getting close to being a runaway at this point, right? Like
yes.
Like Josh Allen is running away with it, and the only guy that's going to keep pace is as you stated is Jared Goff. But again, I know I'm crazy, but they're coming off, the Bucs are coming off their bye week, and listen to how they finished, Jess. New York Giants.
Oh goodness.
Carolina Panthers.
Oh.
Vegas Raiders.
Oh my gosh.
Then they have the Chargers, so a good team. Dallas Cowboys, Carolina Panthers, New Orleans Saints. So
they should go 6-1.
They really have a chance to go 6-1. And if he plays at the level he's been playing at and can minimize his turnovers just a touch, you're talking about a guy that's going to put himself in that top 3 conversation. Now, again, I doubt he wins it. Josh Allen, I don't want to say cemented himself this weekend with the win, but he's made it very difficult for anybody else to really catch up at this point, because that was, you and I were watching it. That was an impressive performance, especially at the end of the game on that 4th down, where it was almost like I will not be denied. Right.
Oh my gosh. Tony Romo totally called it too. He's like, he's going to use his legs. Not only did he pick up the 1st down, he rumbled all the way to the end zone. Imagine this. Over the last 7 games, do you think Baker could throw over the last 7 games 21 touchdown passes?
It's definitely plausible.
Get to 45. I think 40. I think he's going to get to 40.
Right. And 40 right. And 40 really puts him in the conversation, right? Because
that'd be wild.
And so that's what I said. It's a long shot. I understand that. But that's the only really kind of interesting guy on the outside, because like you said, for the Cardinals, it's about winning. And then Kyler's got to be statistically a little more significant in those wins. Something that you and I, don't care about. Win games, get to the playoffs, win a playoff game, like Jess and I'll call this a great season. Like we'll be like, hey,
well, and like for the Kyler talk, and like it honestly, we don't need Kyler to win MVPs, just that he be playing at that sort of level, to be consistently in that 2020 2021 mode where he's playing, where he is elevating guys, and we're finally seeing that. Like, he is carrying this team, and while there's playmakers, they're getting plays from Trey McBride, James Conner, and the running game have been great, but he's playing the quarterback position at a very good level. You're talking about his play top 10, top 5, and if he's consistently there, that's just what we want. But I don't think anyone here needs Kyler to win MVPs.
Here's the thing: MVPs are great, and anybody that tells you different is lying. But they're insignificant in the scheme of the overall greatness of a player. Like, and insignificance probably too strong of a word, but they're less impactful. If you go back to Tom Brady, the greatest player of all time, he has plenty of MVPs. He has 3, but it's not those 3 MVPs that you're like, oh, that's what makes him the greatest. No, it's the 7 Super Bowls, right? It's the Super Bowls and the 5 Super Bowl MVPs. And so, like, it's just, I don't know, man. It's just wild to think that we're having this conversation after the last couple of years where it was so toxic and it was so like, oh, they need to move on from this guy, and it's time to, this and that and the other. And it's like, no, they're doing a great job of creating a structure around him that can benefit him and the team for the foreseeable future. And I think that's the biggest thing, is like, if he's a guy that is consistently getting you to the playoffs, that's what you're looking for. And if his renaissance is similar to Jared Goff's, and what we've seen from Goff since he's been in in Detroit, right? I think everybody will be okay with that, because you're talking about winning a lot of games, and then making Pro Bowls, and you'll be like, hey, I'd rather that, I'll take 30, a 30 touchdown season here and there, but like, or 35 touchdown season here and there, but I really want a quarterback that's consistently putting us in a position to be in the playoffs, because that's just, I mean, again, there's been 3, or I guess 4 since they came to Arizona, right? It's Kyler, it's Carson, it's Kurt, and Jake Plummer. Like, they've been here.
And here's the thing, and we love Jake Plummer. We do. One of my absolute favorite players of all time. Statistically, he was not a good quarterback here. Like, you look at statistically, he wasn't good. He had 1 year where he threw more touchdowns than interceptions with the Cardinals. 1.
Right.
We love him. I love Jake Plummer. He was infinitely better as a quarterback when he went to Denver, but we hail him as one of the best quarterbacks that we've had in Arizona. He wasn't that good a quarterback here. He was fun, and he's a legend. He is a legend here, but Kyler is, like, statistically what he's doing. Okay, we need to, please show that Kyler love, because he has transformed himself 100% into the quarterback that we have wanted him to be. He's saying the right things. He's doing the right things. He's performing. So, yeah, enough of that. We are Kyler Murray stands on this show 100%. So, coming up next on the Rise of Sierra podcast, Mr. Cardinals talking with the Cardinals have an important decision to make this week for a player that's coming back from injury. That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise of Secret podcast, Best of Cardinals talk on the web. Seth, do you remember the conversations that we were having in our group chat about the Cardinals season might have been determined by the fact they don't have anyone to play right tackle any better or at the same level of Jonah Williams? Do you remember that in week 1?
Oh yeah.
Well, Jonah Williams is coming back this week, and we're going to assume that he's going to be the starting lineup. But one of the underrated things that we've had from this season has been the play of Kelvin Beachum. We talked about Kelvin Beachum was one of our duds of the game in week 1 against the Buffalo Bills. He was, when he had to come in the second quarter for Williams after he went down with the knee injury. Beachum was bad, but you know what Beachum has not been really ever since? He hasn't been bad at all. And we've talked about the guys that he's lined up against. You've had Nick Bosa. He was going to have Montez Sweat. He's had Khalil Mack. He's had some really dynamic pass rushers line up opposite him. Will McDonald last week, and he has been stonewalling guys. And I looked up his pass blocking stats on PFF. I know PFF is not the end all be all, but if there was one thing about PFF that I do like them for, quantifiable stats and things like that. When it comes to throws, catches, when it comes to pressures allowed and things like that. So in week 1, he allowed a pair of sacks and a hurry. So 3 total pressures. Do you know how many pressures he has allowed the entire season, Seth?
How many?
5. 3 of them were in that first game. So in 8 games, because he missed a game with the hamstring injury. So in 8 games since week 1, he's allowed 1 sack and 1 hurry, and he's been perfect in pass blocking. No sacks allowed, no hits allowed, no hurries allowed in the last 5 weeks. And Jonah Williams, we will definitely say you would agree he should be a better right tackle than Kelvin Beachum, right?
I mean, that's the hope. And there's a twofold conversation about this, Jess, that is tough. And it's just the reality of it. It's one, you're talking about the 5th best rushing team in the NFL, the 2nd best in yards per attempt. You're talking about a team that's done a wonderful job in protecting Kyler Murray, and you and I have talked about that. Much of that is thanks to Kyler Murray's ability to avoid things.
Very, very good in the pocket. Like, his pocket awareness has been great. When to get going, and of course he helps himself. But interesting. Kelvin Beachum, according to PFF, not a good run blocker. He's a lowly rated run blocker at 53.1 or whatever that is. But this is an interesting decision because you and I don't know how much you guys paid attention to Jonah Williams in the he didn't play in the preseason, but in the offseason and training camp, there were honestly, he didn't look great. And while the coaches all really like what he does, Williams has had there's been questions about his performance, and now you get him back, and you'd think that's going to improve the tackle position. You'd think, but then you get the performance that you've gotten from Beachum for these many weeks. I'm like, do you go back to Jonah Williams, or do you ease him in, or how do you do that?
It's a really hard conversation, and it's the situation of does a guy lose his job because of injury, right? And we've had this debate in baseball.
It happens sometimes. It does happen sometimes.
Right. We've had the debate for ages in terms of this, especially in baseball, right? But I mean, you go back, and I just want everybody to understand, I'm just using it as an example. It's not, but Tom Brady got his job because of an injury.
He certainly did.
And so it's not a hard and fast rule, but at the same time, as good as Kelvin Beachum has played, and I think we all agree with that, as good as Kelvin Beachum has played, he is not played so well that it doesn't warrant Jonah Williams getting a chance to get his job back. And that's kind of where this is at this point. Is like, you've been good. You haven't been good enough to say like, oh, this isn't going to change. But on the flip side of all of that, Jess, you've won 4 games in a row. You've taken control of the division. And this could theoretically upset the apple cart. And that's where you have to be very careful with all of this. And I quite frankly, I'm glad I don't have to make the decision, because it's very difficult to come in and just straight up say like no or yes. Like it's so unless one of Kelvin, or which neither of them will, and understandably, but unless one of Kelvin or Jonah say, hey, it's his, or it's mine, or it's his, whatever, like it is just an impossible scenario to have to go and figure out, and one I don't envy. And that's the thing, is they're both respected, they're both liked, they're both leaders in the locker room. Kelvin's obviously been here a little longer. Jonah's obviously on a bigger contract. And it just becomes this situation where you have to find the balance and the nuance of it, and not create animosity in a room and in an organization that is, on the precipice of turning around a franchise that's been, mostly moribund for its entire existence.
So I honestly, because it's been so long since Williams played, I wouldn't be surprised if they worked them both in, simply because like he's had his 3 weeks, he's been practicing, but it wouldn't surprise me if Williams started and Beachum still got a couple of series, kind of like how they did last year with left guard, and what they've done at times this year at right guard, where Tristan Colon starts and Isaiah Adams gets a couple of series. Or last year, Elijah Wilkinson, when he came back, he started, and Colon would get a couple of series. And then within, say, by week 14, that Jonah Williams then, being at full strength, getting the reps in, and so on and so forth, that would be back at 100%. But that for me, that's going to be an interesting thing to note, and to see if it changes anything, because as we know what happens on an offensive line, continuity matters a lot.
And it does, and that's the hard part, Jess, is like you're still kind of experimenting with Isaiah Adams, getting some reps, like you said, but Tristan Colon's getting the majority of them at that right guard position. And you're just at such an important juncture of this season that it just feels like a very dangerous game to play. Does it not? Like,
it does, but like you can't not go back to Jonah Williams, right? You can't not do it after he worked his way back.
Right. You can't not do it, but it's also not something that you just do.
It's gonna be so weird, because then you're like, if Williams goes in there and if against the Seahawks, there's pressure off of that side, we'll be like, well, Beachum wasn't giving any of that up.
Right.
But I don't know. That's going to be interesting to watch over the next couple of weeks. Let's go to our final segment. Coming up next on the Rise of Sierra podcast, Best Our Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's talk predictions Final 7 games of the year for the Cardinals. What are we going to get? That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. We want to talk predictions. We've got the schedule for the Cardinals and the rest of the NFC West. What are we going to do? What are we going to predict? So let's do what we're doing now, and then what we want to do is predict the rest of the schedule for the Cardinals. Do the same for the Rams, the Seahawks, and the 49ers. Let's start with the Cardinals, who sit at 6-4. They've got 2 of the next 3. We've gone over the schedule so many times. Seattle, Minnesota, Seattle, then New England, then Carolina, then Rams, then the 49ers. And what'll be important to note is the 49ers are already 1-3 in the division. The Cardinals are 2-0. If they win one more division game, or if they win 2 division games out of their next 3, like even if they going into San Francisco, going into that last week against San Francisco, if they pick up 2 division wins in their final 3 games, it won't matter. They will have 100% the tiebreaker over the 49ers, because at best the San Francisco can tie them head to head. And if the Cardinals pick up 4 division wins, if they finish with the same record, Cardinals will win the division over the 49ers. So here is my prediction for the last 7 games. I believe they will win 2 out of the next 3 games. I don't want to say whether it'll be both Seattle games and lose to Minnesota, or if they will lose this weekend and then win the next 2. I think they win versus. I think they're going to win 2 out of 3. They're going to beat both the Patriots and the Carolina Panthers. They're going to beat the Rams. So that gives them 5 wins and 11 wins going into the final week. And then I honestly don't think it matters what happens in week 18. But I predict 11 wins for the Cardinals at this point. I'm going to say they're going to win 11 games and they're going to win the division. Even before or even if we go, we'll say this. They win 1 out of 3. They win 4 games going into the final weekend. And they're at 10-6 going into the final weekend. And then I don't know what happens. But how many wins do you think the Cardinals will get? I'm predicting 5 wins out of the last 7 games, and they'll win the division.
Yeah, I think they go 5-2 as well. And so here's where it gets interesting, Jess. The NFC West as a whole, obviously 7-0 would change all of that. But the NFC West as a whole, after everything that we've talked about coming into this year, they have a very good chance of only getting their division winner in the playoffs this year.
Yes. And that's how it stands right now. In the playoff picture.
And so that is why for me, and I'm assuming you as well, because I think they go 5-2 down the stretch. But I think both of us are also doing that because we think that getting to 11 wins all but guarantees them winning the division, right? So we're like, hey, so if we put 5 into the atmosphere, it's like that'll work, because you look at it, they have a head-to-head with the Vikings. The Vikings are 8-2. Let's just, for sake of fun times, let's say they beat the Vikings. Now they have the tiebreaker on the Vikings, but that's the only tiebreaker they have.
Yes.
Outside of the division, because the Packers and Commanders, and I think the Commanders end up falling out, but that's neither here nor there. But
the Cliff Kingsbury effect.
the Packers
Talking about Washington again.
yeah, the Packers and the Commanders have the tiebreaker. Now, the NFC West is 8, 9, and 10 in the playoff standings. The Rams, obviously, at 8, since they're second in the West. The Seahawks are third in the West, so they're 9. The Niners 10 because they're last in the NFC West. It's always a fun chuckle. So that's the thing, is the NFC West is right there, but the Cardinals do not have the tiebreakers over the Commanders and Packers, who are 7th and 6th respectively, and it feels like those teams plus the Vikings are going to be the 3 teams that are in that wild card chase. Now, I'm looking at the Commanders' schedule, Jess, and again, like the joke about Baker Mayfield, it's not impressive. They have the Cowboys, the Titans, then their bye week, then they come back with the Saints, then they play a tough Eagles team. That's the tough one, but it's at home at least, and then they end with Falcons and Cowboys. So there's a legitimate chance that they could go 3-3 in that 6-game stretch, which would still be disappointing with who they're playing. Let's be honest about that. But there's a chance they go 3-3 and get to 10-7, and that's what we're talking about. That 11-win mark for the Cardinals seems like the right buffer to, I don't want to say guarantee, because you can never say guarantee,
right?
But it just feels like that's the place that they need to get to win the NFC West, because it's one game more than ever, because then everybody else in the division has to go 6-1.
Yeah, and that's the well. And if you look at the schedules, because the rest of the division, tough schedules. Here's what the 49ers have. They're at Green Bay and at Buffalo the next 2 weeks. At best, they win one of those games. They're going to be 6-6. Okay, they've got Chicago. Okay, they can be 7-6. They've got the Rams.
And somebody has to win that game.
Yes, so maybe 8-6 at Miami. Miami's playing well. 8-7. Detroit.
They're going to smash them.
They 9-7, or 9 or 8-8, and then it won't matter.
Right.
Then you'll have week 18 in Arizona. Here's the Seahawks. Okay, the Seahawks have the easiest, but they play the Cardinals twice. So when it comes to the Seahawks, the Cardinals control things. They win one game over the Seahawks. That means in those 2 games there, you've got 5 games left, and they're still a game behind. And the Cardinals have 3 wins in the division and can win any tiebreaker with a win over the Rams or the Niners. So they've got the Jets. Okay, if they split Arizona's game, they'll probably beat the Jets 2-1. The Jets are a mess.
But here's real quick on that, because I agree the Jets are a mess. But it's they just had a highly, highly emotional game in San Francisco.
Yes.
Now they host Arizona, obviously, but just then they go to New York, and it's on the road. And think about this, Jess. Then they have to come back to Arizona for their next game. Like that 4-game stretch, just from a like physicality and travel standpoint, is hilarious.
I mean, especially because they've lost 5 of 7. The Seahawks have lost 5 of 7 games. So like, could they go 2-1 or go 1-2, losing both games against Arizona? If the Cardinals knock off Seattle in both games, my goodness, the division is almost won.
Oh man, that's
almost.
I mean, isn't it crazy to think if those are the 2 games they win and they lose to to Minnesota. And by the way, if they lose to Minnesota, again, never say never, but it's basically impossible for them to get a wild card spot because they would have lost every so they wouldn't have a tiebreaker. Like they would have to finish with a better record than all of those teams, which seems like a lot to ask at that point. So yeah, I mean,
there's one game on the Seahawks schedule you really look at and say, okay, probably one of this is Jets. Every other game is either like or a toss-up because you've got Arizona twice, Green Bay, Minnesota, at Chicago, and at the Rams. And
that by the way, that
at Chicago's on Thursday night.
Yeah, it's a short week after Minnesota. So like you're home against Minnesota, I get that, but then you're at Chicago on a short week. That's that again. They got screwed when it came to end of season schedule, like just travel and schedule like that. Like the Cardinals.
Go for it.
No, I was gonna say, I think it's hard to say that they go 3-4 because I've just seen Seattle.
I think 3 wins. I think 3 wins is the best they do.
And I'm with you. It's just I've just seen Seattle, and I know it's not Pete Carroll finally, but I've just seen Seattle too often weasel their way to 10 wins, and it doesn't make any sense. And so, I mean, obviously, the absolute worst case scenario is that they beat the Cardinals twice, right? Like that's disaster in and of itself.
If the Cardinals lose both games against Seattle, well, yeah, I think that tells us about the Cardinals and the rest of the way that they're not there yet.
And then you look at the Rams, man. I mean, the Niners have 100% the toughest schedule, but the Rams ain't far behind. I mean, they're hosting the Eagles on Sunday Night Football this week.
And the Eagles are rolling right now.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Then they go to New Orleans.
I don't know what to think about the Saints. Are they good again?
Right. And Derek Carr's playing at a weirdly high level. It's
in the super. I mean, I guess the whatever they call it, the Caesars Superdome.
Yeah, but then they go to Buffalo, Jess, December 8th, and that could be their swan song, kind of.
They got the Niners. They got the Jets. So how many wins they got? They go Philly, at New Orleans, Buffalo, San Fran, at the Jets. Then at home, they closed the last 2 games of the season, Arizona and Seattle. How many wins do you think they get?
It's wild because I would say 2.
Really? I think they get 4.
See,
they get 4?
I think they lose the next 3 in a row, man.
Oh, that would, wow.
So I think they lose the next 3 in a row, and that screws up everything. And I think that they have a little fight against San Francisco, beat San Francisco again, and then I think they lose or beat the Jets, so that's their 2, and then they lose to Arizona, and then that's kind of like their eliminator, and they're done. Okay. That's my thing. Here's the thing: they could go 1-2, and then that changes, right? And then they get to 3. So I'm predicting that loss in New Orleans. If they win in New Orleans, it goes from 2 to 3 wins. I don't see them winning over 3 unless they beat the Cardinals. Like I think they have to beat the Cardinals to get to that 4th win. And so we'll see how that happens.
I think the way things are going right now, you've got them at 7 wins, the Seahawks at 8 wins.
Yeah, I think the Seahawks finish with 8, and I think that the Niners finish with 9. So
this is wild. And what we will see is that the Niners are the latest victim to the Super Bowl hangover.
Yeah, because I think you kind of hit it on the head, right? Like I think that they lose to Green Bay and Buffalo. I think they have a little 3-game win streak, and then I think their season's I think they get obliterated by the Lions.
And that basically ends it.
Yeah, on Monday Night Football, and that's kind of their last whimper. things. Because they go to 5-7, then they fight back to 8-7, and then you go to 8-8, and you get blown out on national TV on Monday Night Football by the Lions, and everything is just like, oh crap, So I that's how I think this goes. Here's the thing I'll say, Jess. Like, obviously, right now they're sitting at the 3 seed. That was awesome, right? Like, just sitting at home, not doing anything. And
what a great bye week. They
Yeah.
they increase their lead in the division and move up in the NFC. Fantastic. They won the bye week.
Right. So right now they get the Packers. I think the Packers loss was fluky, as we know, but that's a tough out. I mean, they're a very, very good football team. And we talked about it. It's going to be really tough to get to that 2 seed. But if they can find a way to stranglehold that 3 seed and host a playoff game, and I know the 4 seed does too, but and host a playoff game, I think it's going to work out that they'll end up with the Vikings.
Yeah.
And I think
that's going to be wild because it pretty much almost every scenario
they're going to
have going to be a rematch game. They're going to host a rematch game if they win the division.
And so that's what's fun about that, because you just look at it and this, if they could get the 3 seed in that Vikings team, or the Commanders for that matter, figure out a way to get to that 6 seed, you feel good coming out of that.
Have face that Cliff Kingsbury offense in the playoffs. We know how that goes, right?
Right. And then you know what? You kind of shrug your shoulders. You're like, we're a year ahead of schedule. We won a playoff game.
Oh, if they win a playoff game, this season is not only successful, it is wildly successful. I think if they win a playoff game, they probably sign Gannon to a freaking contract extension, which is crazy, but
Right.
They probably do it.
Well, and so the other thing is, this is like, you want to see that this is a sustainable thing, and not to take a shot at another team, but you look at what the Houston Texans are this year, and kind of how they're the 4 seed in the playoffs. They're going to make the playoffs because they play in a god awful division, but the way that they've kind of taken a step back this year, right? And you're like, that's not what we want. We don't want a singular season. That's been kind of what we've said all along, right? We want something that's sustainable, that hey, next year you come in and everybody looks at you and they're like, hey, this is a tough out. This is the team that we don't want to face in December, and especially in January. And that's what this is building towards. And that's what the hope is, right? Just that they get there. And like we said, if it's a year ahead of schedule and God forbid they win a playoff game on top of it, and then they lose to the Eagles in the second round, you go, hey, they weren't supposed to even be there. We were hoping that they would lose to the Eagles in the first round, right? and you lose in the second round, that's even better. And so that's where we're at. But you're also looking at the longevity of it, which goes back to the Jonah Williams, Kelvin Beachum thing, right?
Yep.
Is it hey, we can't make this move because we've been winning all this year? Or is it no, we have to get this right to make sure that Jonah's the guy for the future as well. And those are just interesting discussions and decisions that we'll get to, it'll be fun to watch. And hopefully it's fun to watch in the sense of that they're, playing in the playoffs in January and playing meaningful football in January for the first time, in a while, man, because it's been ugly for a long time here in Arizona.
Yeah, it'd be fantastic to see this, but I think we're on board with this Cardinals team. We think they're good again, so let's keep it rolling. That'll wrap up this edition of the Rise of Secret podcast. Best of Cardinals talk on the web. Seth and I will be back later this week to preview Cardinals Seahawks. I should have a show with Seahawks Wire now. He's now the managing editor, Cole Musgrove, a guy who has been on a couple of the opponent previews in summers past. So we got 2 more shows coming up the rest of the week. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. This is episode 615. We'll be back again soon. Thanks for listening, as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, rise up, Sea Red.